Breathing is unique as a part of that system because it's the only part that we can consciously control. And I think that's where we lose ourselves, because you can just get so wrapped up in one part of your identity. You still have to work hard to not fall back into the same patterns. This is going to sound weird.
Welcome to the Restorative Force podcast, where we believe that it should feel good to be human. Modern life is fast-paced and often unforgiving. It stresses our minds, bodies, and the planet more than it needs to. So through conversations and ideas, our aim is to uncover the roadmap for shifting unsustainable cultures at pace for both personal and planetary well-being. So take a deep breath and join me, Hannah Pang, as we explore the path towards restoration and regeneration for ourselves and the world around us. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Restorative Force podcast. I'm here today with Jamie Clements, who is a breathwork coach and founder of The Breath Space. Jamie has worked alongside top entrepreneurs, politicians, athletes, and many more to share the life-changing potential of breathwork and altered states of consciousness. Can't wait to dive into that. After discovering firsthand just how impactful breathwork can be, Jamie strongly believes that breathwork is the most universal and powerful tool that we all have access to change our minds and also live healthier and happier lives. Jamie's trained in a variety of breathwork modalities and tailors this to his clients and various groups accordingly. So whether it's performance breathwork for athletes, therapeutic breathwork for healing, or simple breathing techniques for nervous system regulation, the power of breathwork can support us all. So Jamie, thanks so much for being with me here today.
Thank you for having me, Hannah. No, I'm super excited to be here, and I'm sorry that my bio is a little bit wordy.
It's great. Good overview, and so much stuff that I want to pick up on from it. But I guess to kick us off, can you, tell us yourself, who you are, what the breath space is, and also how you got into it. How did you find kind of breath work initially?
For sure. Yeah. So I find the introduction question really interesting because it's very easy for me, or not easy, but straightforward to sit here and kind of explain what I do in the context of my work. And I guess for today, that's probably where it's easiest to begin as well. So I wasn't always a breathwork coach, believe it or not. I used to work, I had grand ambitions of being an investment banker, studied economics at university, have an economics degree, played a very high level of rugby and sport in my kind of late teens and early 20s. And about 5.5 years ago, found myself really in quite a deep, dark place with my mental health. I had a number of challenges with my mental health through my late teens and my early 20s that came to a head in a bit of a perfect storm when I was 24, just about to turn 25. And it was really from there that things began to change. I discovered breathwork. I got myself out of a very deep, dark place. And breathwork was really the biggest catalyst within that. And that's what led me initially to this work. And then I spent quite a lot of time, diving deep down the rabbit hole of breathwork and everything that it has to offer, and got to a point where I really felt compelled to want to be able to share that with other people. And I guess all of my experiences with breathwork that supported me have informed now how I work with other people. So you touched on it a little bit there in the intro around both the, I suppose, simpler end of the breathwork spectrum, where we're talking about optimizing our breathing for health and well-being, but also looking at simple breathing techniques for nervous system regulation, things that now as breathwork is starting to grow in popularity, a lot more people are aware of. And then we also have performance breathing, but then we have this deeper end of the breathwork spectrum as well, where we're working with and exploring things like altered states of consciousness and emotional healing. And so I really love, A, that I get to do this for work, but also B, that the way that I work with people is exactly through the lens of how this work supported me. And that allows it just to be so, yes, tailored, but also I know how much this can help people. And that evidence has only been built over the last few years as well. So yeah, the business was born about 4 years ago, and 3.5, 4 years ago. And since its inception, it's just kind of grown and grown in a really lovely way. I think as more and more people are waking up to the power of this work. And yeah, I've been really fortunate to work with amazing brands, amazing individuals, with companies, with athletes, with really everybody and anybody who will listen to me talk about breathing, including people listening to this podcast. So yeah, I think that's a little bit of an intro. There's, other things that I do, but yeah, breathwork is at the core of a lot of it.
Amazing. And how did you first, in those kind of deep, dark moments, like where did breathwork come from for you?
I sort of say it was a happy accident, and one that I wasn't really particularly receptive to at the beginning. So
Interesting.
I would say I would put myself into the camp of being, at the time, a young, troubled, closed-minded man in his early 20s. And I had no concept or connection to spirituality. I had very little capacity to understand myself or my emotions, and I had very little interest in it. And then I think, unfortunately, what often happens when that is the case is that we reach a point where we can no longer ignore those things. And for me, that was the depths of anxiety and panic attacks and depression alongside it. And from that point, I sort of by hook and by crook found myself needing to support myself, or needing to find ways to support myself. And I started going to therapy. I got into essentially that long list that people will give you when you're struggling with your mental health. It's like, have you thought about trying yoga, meditation, exercise, running, stretching, therapy, all of these different things? And I tried all of them, and
Going down, checking them off.
literally checking off the list. And there's a reason why those things are on the list, because not all of them will work for an individual, but some of them will. And so I was training at a studio, practicing yoga, doing just sort of exercise and circuits training there. And they had one breathwork class on the schedule per week. It was on a Wednesday morning, and I would always go and train first thing on a Wednesday morning and then go straight to work. And the class straight after the one that I was doing was breathwork. And the head trainer, who's actually now a business partner of mine and a good friend, said, "Oh, have you never thought about sticking around for breathwork?" And he didn't really know the depths of what I was going through, but he obviously knew the power of breathwork. And there are quite a lot of similarities between us in terms of life experiences and interests. And I went, okay, well, there's someone here who I respect and whose opinion I respect, saying, give this a try. And so, of course, the natural thing to do was to ignore it and say no. And a few weeks later, I think it was a schedule thing where I was like, okay, I actually have a free morning here where I'm not going to the office, and decided to stick around for breathwork. And at this point, I always say, I would love to say that changed everything.
Right.
The first session changed my life, cured me of all my ailments, because that would make for great social media content. But it wasn't the case, but what I would say is there was enough in that first session for me to know that there was something in it. And so I stuck with it, became a regular practice. And from there, I started to have experiences that did change things for me quite significantly. And so that was, sort of the reluctant beginnings of where things started.
Yeah. And can you talk about that, I guess, period where you really were starting to feel it working? And like, what was that experience like? What were the shifts that you were seeing in yourself? And also, how did that then, I guess, manifest to other things in your life?
Yeah, I think I like to talk about this from kind of a dual-ended approach. So again, this feeds into how I work with people now, but it changed things on the micro and the macro. So on the micro, I was learning that I had autonomy over my state. And what I mean by that was that as someone who was experiencing severe anxiety and panic attacks, I just felt like a passenger. I was like, why am I so anxious all the time? Why am I so triggered all the time? Why am I so affected by that thing or this thing? And why do I have no say in the matter? And through understanding how to use my breath, how to understand my nervous system, my stress response, all of these little things that feed into this broader puzzle of breath work, I suddenly had a way, a tool, a toolkit to respond to what was going on around me and regulate myself and take back some level of control over my experience of life. So that was actually, yes, on a micro level, but hugely impactful, like a genuine game changer. And then on the macro side, this is where we're starting to get into the realm of these deeper modalities of breathwork. And I had a number of very deep, very impactful experiences of emotional release and catharsis, of altered states of consciousness, of deep insights into kind of the layers of the psyche and parts of myself that I'd maybe lost touch with as well. And so I think those two combined created this platform and this trampoline, kind of this launch pad to move forward and come out of that place. So yeah, kind of that combination for me was massive.
Yeah. And I guess to go right back to the basics, like what even is breath work? Obviously we're all breathing all the time, but yeah,
I got caught out by a security guard at a venue back in the summer, because it's really typical that taxi drivers or who else? It's normally taxi drivers, but they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I say, "Oh, I'm a breathwork coach." They're like, and this security guard goes, "Oh, what are you here for?" I was like, "Oh, I'm running the breathwork session at the venue," and he goes, "Oh, I'm really into breathwork," and I was like, I was a bit taken aback. So this guy in his 60s down in Bristol. And I was like, really? Like, I was engaging with this interest. And he goes, "Yeah, I've been breathing my whole life." I was like, oh, he's done me there.
Yeah.
He's absolutely done me. And that's a really common response. And I understand it, because on the face of it, yes, we are breathing all the time. Breathing is incredibly simple on the face of it. Inhale, exhale, repeat. And so when we're talking about breathwork as a field of practice, what do we really mean? And I think this has become an increasingly important question as it's grown in popularity as well, because more and more people are going, what's that all about? Why are we talking about breathing so much? And for me, the way that I approach this work is breathwork as this umbrella term. So breathwork is any way that you can use your breath to shift your state physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And then within that, we have these different areas of practice, these different fields of practice, from the micro through to the macro and everything in between. And I always like to say, we are breathing all the time. It is incredibly simple on the face of it, but it is so intricate, complex, and impactful once you get under the surface.
It's like that iceberg diagram.
Exactly. It's, breathing up the top, and then the psyche, sleep quality, your subconscious mind, all of these little things. And the stat that I always come back to that just really, I guess, hammer home the point of why breathing and breath work is important is that the average adult breathes over 20,000 times a day. Most people over 25,000 times a day. If you're doing anything that many times in a day, make sure you're doing it well. Make sure you're doing it in a way that's supporting you. And I think that for me is always, if we're talking basics here, that's why breathwork is here. That's why it's here to stay. And that's why people are talking about it more and more.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, why do you think it has become so popular now? Is it just the awareness of it has been raising? Do you think people are more stressed? So they're also getting to that point where, okay, something has to change. I need to do something or try something.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted picture, I think. But I think a couple of the ones you mentioned there in particular, I very much view this as a direct reaction and response to the pace of modern life. So that I often view breathwork and nervous system regulation as an antidote to everything we're experiencing, chronic stress, chronic anxiety, chronic nervous system dysregulation. So not just breathwork, but all of these modalities and practices that are popping up that are helping us to re-regulate are just going to get more and more popular, especially the ones that are accessible, that are easy to engage with. I also think there's another piece around this, and my mind's gone slightly blank here.
We'll go into something else.
Yeah, we can go into something else. Why is breathwork getting so popular? I think, it's the simplicity. I think for a long time, and this is where my mind was going before it went blank, is that what we're seeing at the moment with, and again, I think it's just a counterbalance, because technological advancement, AI, the intricacies of the pace and the depth and the complexity of modern life, we've seen this huge rise in what are ultimately incredibly basic human experiences. So everyone getting into cold water,
right.
People learning how to breathe again, functional mushrooms, all of these things that there's no tech involved whatsoever. Tech can be an enabler for us to create breathwork content or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But actually all of these modalities that we're engaging with are fundamental to being human, and they're ancient. It's sort of ancient wisdom packaged up in modern marketing. And we're going to see more and more of that, because I do think we're seeing this divergence of people who are just falling down the rabbit hole of the algorithm and the AI and TikTok and everything else.
Yeah.
And then the people who are aware of the pitfalls of that and wanting to work against it.
Yeah, and I guess being mindful to not get too swept up in it and keep that connection to your humanness and the like value and magic of that. So you've mentioned it a couple of times. I would love if you could almost explain the how of breathwork, and when you say nervous system regulation, what is that and what's its relationship to breathwork and breathing?
For sure. So I think, I'm always mindful of how deep into the weeds of the science we go, but I think this is probably the only or the most important piece of science and neurology when we're talking about breathwork, which is we have in our broader nervous system in the human body, the peripheral nervous system, and within that we have something called the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system governs all of our body's automatic functioning, so pupil dilation, saliva production, heart rate, digestion, and breathing. Breathing is unique as a part of that system because it's the only part that we can consciously control. So everything else is happening automatically, but your breath can happen automatically, but can also be controlled consciously and changed by the mind. And so through changing your breath, you can shift the state of your autonomic nervous system and your overall functioning. And so within that system, we have, broadly speaking, two branches. We have the sympathetic response, the parasympathetic response. Sympathetic, nothing to do with sympathy. This is the stress response. This is fight, flight, freeze. And then parasympathetic being rest and digest. And the breath ultimately can act as a remote control or a lever to move in and out of those branches on cue. And so we can use the breath to shift into a desired state or out of an undesired state. And really, that is where the power of this work comes from, because it's just that lever. It's so accessible and it's so impactful. It can be a matter of breaths, a matter of seconds for this shift to happen. And our mutual friend, Ollie Patrick, I and I were talking a little while back and sort of came to this consensus, led by him, that actually the problem in modern life isn't too much stress, it's not enough rest. And so actually stress is not to be demonized. Stress is important. We can't just hide from stress. But the issues arise around chronic stress, around chronic anxiety, when our nervous system becomes dysregulated. And what we mean by that is that it loses its innate ability to flick out of stress. So if there's too much stress, not enough rest, your foot is on the gas, it never comes off the gas. Whereas a healthy, regulated nervous system goes into stress when it needs to and into relaxation when it needs to, and we're flicking constantly between the two. A lot of us lose touch with the down regulation, with the calm, with the restorative force.
Yes. Wow, seamless.
Seamless. And so because of that, we have to find tools and methods to create that shift. And the breath is arguably the most impactful and simplest way to do that.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think to go back to what you were saying before as well, it's as if as a society, a Western society in these urban centers, we are being swept towards one kind of mode of operating, and just how the rate of change is happening so quickly that you can definitely see how easy it would be to constantly be in that state. If you're constantly behind, you're constantly chasing, that's a very stressful feeling, and then that just becomes normal because everyone's operating in that way. So it's great that that's, as you say, starting to feel a little bit more balanced with awareness and platforms such as yours, where you're giving people the tools to be able to leverage this very accessible thing that we are doing all the time, but have it be not the automatic version, but a really powerful tool that you have access to. And even, if you're freaking out about something and someone just says, just stop, like take a deep breath, just even that, minor invitation is so powerful, where everyone can feel the power and importance that can play in regulating your nervous system. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it is that invitation to come off of autopilot.
Yeah.
Autopilot is easy.
Yeah.
But it's not helpful. And there's a really amazing poem that I came across on Instagram, and the first line is something like, you wonder why you're so tired all the time, but you're not even resting when you rest. And that is our biggest problem, is we think we're resting, but we're not.
Yeah.
And there's this misnomer, this misunderstanding that we all fear as ambitious people, as driven people, as hardworking people, that if we rest, we're taking our foot off the gas. But rest is actually going to help you be more productive when you're in effort. The work will reflect the quality of the rest.
Yeah.
And so if you're always on, your overall output is just going to be at 70, 80% rather than you go 100%, 20%, 100%, 20% and get good quality sleep, proper rest, proper exercise. And the most efficient, productive, creative people I know are the best at switching on and off. And I think that's a missing skill for a lot of people.
Yeah. And how does breath work play into rest? Because all of my experiences with breath work feel very active and quite intense. So how does that then, are you then like equipping people to then be able to rest kind of afterwards? Or yeah, I don't really know what the question is, but do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I think I do. So this is where, again, I think the kind of understanding and education piece around breathwork is important, because for some people, breathwork, they associate with Wim Hof and the Wim Hof method and really activating hyperventilation practices, which hold a place and have merit. The simpler end of the breathwork spectrum, where we're talking about optimizing functional breathing and that parasympathetic response and activating that through the breath, that is where we're talking about rest. This is where we're talking about bringing down the level of stress in your system and switching off and resting properly. And that is easily done if you can get yourself to do it. And I think that's a lot of people's issue, right? So the simplest techniques around this, there were 3 that were studied as part of a Stanford study at the beginning of this year with Andrew Huberman.
Right, yes.
Yeah, when they were looking at breathing techniques versus meditation and 5 minutes of each. And they studied something called a physiological sigh, box breathing, and one other. So the physiological sigh is a really, really well-studied and effective tool to quickly downregulate and reset the nervous system. It's a deep inhale through the nose, a second smaller inhale, and then a soft sigh out of the mouth.
Right. I remember hearing about that one.
I'm not surprised, because everyone's talking about it, because Huberman said so. And then box breathing, super, super popular. Inhale, hold, exhale, and hold, usually 4 seconds per part. And then the one that I love, really, really simple, is just an extended exhale breath in through the nose for a 4 count, out of the mouth or of the nose for 6 to 8 seconds. And by extending that exhale, this is one of our most proven tools to create that drop in heart rate and that downregulation of the nervous system. So really, really simple stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be, I think this is slightly, in a way, the beauty of breath work when we do break it down to the basics, is that you don't have to be an expert, a coach, a seasoned practitioner to get the benefits of this, unlike something a bit more so like meditation, where it does take a bit of time to understand what the intention is. What am I actually trying to do here? On a very basic physiological level, I can say to someone, if you breathe like this, you should feel like this. 90+% of the time, you should feel like this. And that can take, as I said, seconds, minutes, however long you've got. And I think that is, again, part of the rise in popularity is, it's input and outcome. And the Western mind is very attuned to that and likes that. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess now to go, not to the opposite end of the spectrum, but to go to the complex version of breath work and how powerful it can be beyond just, working on rest and regulating your nervous system. But can you tell us about how breath work can lead to altered states of consciousness and just take us to completely different places and spaces? For
sure. So the interesting thing about this breathwork spectrum as well is that the end that we've just spoken about for the majority of this conversation so far is really well studied and really well researched. We're now stepping into a realm that is only just starting to be properly researched and studied. Part of the reason for that is that the experiences are transcendent and mystical and spiritual in nature. And the people that are teaching this stuff and holding space for this aren't too concerned with what the research says.
Measuring it and...
They don't need to strap someone to an fMRI and understand the brainwave activity.
Yeah.
And I can certainly be like that, but I also love the science and love the understanding and getting into the weeds of it. And so there's some studying that I've done, a mentorship that I've been a part of as well, where we've started digging into the theory around this. And so what we're looking at particularly or specifically here is a modality that I work with called conscious connected breathwork.
Okay.
And this informs a broader kind of realm of healing modalities of breathwork that come under a number of different names. What we believe to be going on here from a kind of physiological and a psychological and neurological level is we are shifting our blood biochemistry. We're lowering our blood CO2 levels. That in turn creates hypoxia, so low oxygen environment in the body and the brain. That then can lead to a shift in brainwave activity and also a shift in physical sensation. So a lot of people get tingling in the body, they get changes in body temperature. Some people get like cramping in their hands on occasion as well. And what we believe beyond that is going on within the brain is a number of things, but I think most importantly, we're seeing or expecting to see a quietening in what we would view as the egoic mind, sort of that ruminative part of the brain, this protector part of the brain, and also an increase in activity in the amygdala and other places that are associated with the personal subconscious and unconscious. So what does that actually mean in practice is, in theory, and this matches up, and I think this is why this is interesting because it does actually match up with what we see happening for people, is that if you quieten that protector part, and you increase activity in the subconscious, we get access to past experiences, potentially trauma, potentially memories that our mind has been very good at protecting us from. We know from, I guess, trauma-informed research and work that those protector parts kept us safe at a point in time, but actually might not need to keep us safe from that, and it could actually be holding us back in some capacity. And so through breathwork, we believe, through what we see in practice and what we're starting to see in the research and in theory from a physiological standpoint, is that we are able to drop into a trance-like hypnotic state where subconscious material can resurface to be processed in a safe and held way, which is wild, like from breathing. And I'm glad I didn't trip over myself too much there, but essentially on a very more experiential, anecdotal level, we are able to tap into these higher planes of consciousness where the mind becomes very, very quiet. We can experience emotional releases, processing of past experiences, and really just allow ourselves to revisit things that perhaps we haven't allowed ourselves to process or express in the past.
Wow.
Yeah.
Exciting stuff.
Very exciting.
Really powerful as well. Did you have a time where in your own like journey of getting to know and understanding and trying breath work where, you know, you were on your journey kind of with the simple forms of breath work, and then do you remember, is there a specific experience or something like that where you were, you know, you used breath work as a way the first time, like you experienced getting into more of one of these altered states that we're talking about?
Yeah, I would say I reckon about 6 to 9 months into my first experience with breathwork. And actually some of my first experiences with breathwork were this style of breathwork, but there were a lot of layers there to peel away.
The protector was holding on tight.
Real tight. And so I see this in a lot of people I work with as well, is, you know, they come in having heard a conversation like this. They're like, let's process some trauma. Let's do this. And they come out the other end and like, that was a really nice experience, but why didn't anything show up? And we don't really have a say in what shows up when, because all we're inviting people to do is breathe in this way and we'll see what happens. And that involves trusting yourself, feeling safe with the facilitator, allowing yourself to open, all of these different moving parts. And so probably for about 6 months, I didn't get a huge amount of that deep opening. And then I did. And I remember one particular experience, which more or less was the experience that moved me towards wanting to train in that style of breathwork. And it was at a men's event a number of years ago now. And I had no experience of altered states of consciousness up to this point. And I had visualizations, imagery, memories coming through, huge releases of emotion, like one of the most cathartic experiences I've ever had. And then this experience, and I will never forget this experience of joy and bliss and euphoria. And that was so impactful because I'd more or less been in a state of numbness and depression for the past 8 to 9 years. And I'd lost touch with that extent of joy. It wasn't like I was never happy, but I just, I was sort of trapped in a window of emotion that was fairly numb. And so I had this experience of bliss and euphoria that reconnected me to that. And that opened a door to, I guess, a different experience of life. And that for me was huge, because I just had no idea that was possible, let alone possible through breathing and breathwork.
And I feel like it goes even beyond what we were talking about before of, culturally we're getting swept up with technology, and this is a powerful tool to reconnect us to our humanness. And now this is even, feels like going beyond that, of even just a fuller capacity of what the human experience can be like and offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I've been spending a lot of time discussing and pondering recently is the process of getting older and maturing, and how much of that is constrictive and restrictive, and how we lose playfulness and we lose lightness and we lose joy, and we mature, but we also fatigue. And it's this, we hear so much about, inner child work and all of this stuff. And the reason that I believe part of this is coming up so frequently is because we are so quick to just let go of those important and underestimated parts of ourselves in our lives, and we just become very serious. And I think I still am, to an extent at times, a very serious person, but I know that I'm not fully that. And I think it's so easy when we're trying to achieve and be something, do something, be taken seriously, that you just push all of that to one side. You're like, no, I have to be mature. That's the word for me. It's like, I have to be mature. And I've been told for as long as I can remember how mature I am. You're an old soul. You're so mature for your age. And I'm like, you could just tell me I'm miserable. Like, that's fine. But actually, these people, you see them in their, 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're having a great time and loving life. It's because they're still playing. It's because they're still having a laugh. And I think that cannot be underestimated as kind of a metric of well-being, is how much fun you're having.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. I feel like mature is like a shadow word for you or something. Yeah. I think, through these conversations that I'm having with people on the podcast, I think what has started to come up is the importance of fun and how crucial that is in being well. And I also feel like generally, often the wellness world feels very serious, and it's either very serious or like too calm. And I feel like there is, just a need for play and for fun. And as you say, that like euphoric bliss that you can feel, that you have the potential and you have the capacity to feel. But the wellness world also kind of gets sucked into the, the serious fast-pacedness of culture. And we need to pull it back and say, being a human, we should be having a good time. Being in these human bodies is absolutely magical. How can we explore how great that can be? Yeah,
100%. And I think there's so much about, I guess, the spiritual kind of community, the wellness community in these kind of modern times and urban environments, because I've seen it in myself. I've found myself probably in the last year or so falling back into feeling a way about work that I felt when I was full-time in full-time employment. And I'm like, okay, maybe it wasn't the work that was the issue. Maybe it was the way of living and the way of viewing work and the way that my life was structured. And now, I'm incredibly fortunate that I love what I do. But if you're not careful, that just becomes another avenue for that restriction. And that's where I'm, working against at the moment, where I'm like, okay, I want my business to grow. I want to do well. I want to succeed. But especially when you work for yourself, you can end up working more, and you can end up working in a more structured way and feeling more pressure and all of these things where, I got out of full-time employment because I couldn't do those things anymore and I didn't want to do those things anymore.
Right.
And it's almost like I just moved to a different village within the same arena. You know, the rules of the game are the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to be really mindful of. It's like you might be running your own business. It might be a nicer place to work, a nicer way to work, but you're still living in the same place and you're still in the same arena and the rules are still the same. So you still have to work hard to not fall back into the same patterns.
Totally. It reminds me of how you were describing breathwork or breathing as one of our systems of there's an automatic version of it. And often, we can get swept up in this, okay, this is just the way that things go. And this is the pattern that everyone's moving through. So I guess that's the way to do it. But if you're mindful about it, you can actively choose to say, I think there's a better way and I can actually use work and what I do in a different capacity or approach than what the norm or the automatic system would have us be doing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's hard because we're so good, or I think the ego is so good at kidding us. We can kid ourselves so well that like, I'm outside the system. I'm doing things differently, but you're just doing things differently inside the same system.
Right.
And I think we have to obviously play within the bounds of the game within which we find ourselves. But how can we always maintain an awareness of that fact? Because I think if you end up on autopilot in a different lane, then you're still on autopilot.
Yeah.
And what's the difference?
And do you have things besides breathwork that you use as tools or reminders or systems that you set up for your business that help keep you aware of what we're talking about?
I think for me, and it's a good reminder for me to revisit this, because I think I need to make it a little bit more regimented, which feels strange given what I'm about to say. I need to be more regimented with how frequently and how regularly I connect to spirituality and connect to my spirituality. For me, what that looks like is an experience that gives me an appreciation and an understanding of something much, much bigger than myself. And that can take a number of different forms, travel and kind of novelty, even, a lot of these activities as well touch on a number of different important bases. So something like surfing for me is great because I'm so present, but I'm also, in the ocean and it's all so much bigger than me. And I'm kind of in this flow state and everything around that. And also escaping the city always does it for me. And time in community. Yeah. I think there's something, and it's part of what I really genuinely love about my work is even in the city, getting a group of strangers together to have an experience of an altered state of consciousness or some kind of self-healing, and watching the level of connection those people can foster in 2 hours, right. Having maybe spent 15 minutes of that 2 hours talking, because when we're outside of that space, we are all in that restricted, constricted mode where we want to impress and we want to be seen a certain way. The masks come back on, and we're having to create containers to allow people to take the mask off. And it's almost like we need to flip that. So it's like, how can we more readily encourage mask off behavior in the rest of the world and the rest of the time? And I think that's a really hard task. But for me personally, connection to spirituality and time and community, and sort of authentic community where people are just willing to be fully themselves is always a really important reminder for me to step outside of myself and step outside of the fast lane as well.
Totally. Mask off communities. And I guess, have you seen anything even like within your own practices or groups that you've brought together or in research and science of the power of coming together in community when exploring modalities or breathwork modalities that bring you into altered states? Is there a difference if you're doing it in a group versus doing it by yourself?
So from a purely, I guess, 4 years of experience of holding these spaces, the power is in the process, in the sense that as a group, there might be a little bit of apprehension initially because you're like, I don't know these people. How safe do I feel to really let go? But you often get people who are, everyone's on a spectrum there. Some people are very willing to open up and let go in that space. Others are not. And what the group gives each other is permission. So someone feels an emotion and you hear someone else crying, and that can bring up something in you, and that can then just really, you're allowing each other space to feel. It's very validating in that way. And then secondly, I will always, in retreats and in workshops and things like that, will always start with a form of sharing or sharing circle, and always close with sharing. And the closing circle tends to be the amazing piece of the puzzle, sometimes more impactful than the breathwork itself, because you're sharing sometimes something that is very deep to you, very personal, very vulnerable. And there is such a level of contagiousness to vulnerability, and the level of resonance between people as well. How frequently someone goes, they start their share by going, this is going to sound weird, and I think it might just be a me thing, but here's something vulnerable about me.
And then everyone else is nodding.
Three or four other people going, oh my God, I've never heard someone so eloquently described my life experience in their own. And it's just this holding up of a mirror and this reminding of our shared humanity. And I think we're missing that. Social media saps that out of us. Corporate city life saps that out of us. And we need to find spaces where we can be reminded of that, because what that separation cultivates in us is further separation, hostility, us versus them, polarity, polarization. And what we see in these spaces when people step into them, people who could be vastly different on the face of it from what their life looks like and their life experiences, and they are sharing this deep, vulnerable moment where actually they're more connected than they've felt to themselves and each other in a very, very long time. And I think that is the impact of it, because you walk out of there having had a uniquely powerful personal experience combined with a uniquely powerful group experience, and you sort of leave there going, oh yeah, maybe the world isn't so shit after all. And I think that's at the very least what I hope to kind of give to people as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Because I think it's easy to feel that way, for sure. I think with the constant scrolling and news alerts and just the day-to-day of normal life, or what has now been defined as normal life, can be very overwhelming, very stressful, and very negative, because it gets more eyeballs and more clicks. So creating these spaces where people feel that sense of belonging and connection, and even those times when you feel that sense of like bliss and joy, do just give you that window to say, okay, maybe this doesn't have to be the norm. It isn't. We can just choose to proactively go into those types of spaces and meet those types of people where you can have those experiences with them. And at the beginning, you said breathwork is one thing that you're doing. What else are you up to?
I'd say we were just talking about vulnerability. So yeah, I will lean into a slightly more vulnerable answer, or what feels like a slightly more vulnerable answer. I have always been, I'd categorize myself for as long as I can remember as a high achiever. And that's fed into everything that I've ever done, including starting this business and doing this work. I wanted to succeed, and I continue to want to kind of grow what I'm doing. And through that, I have probably neglected other parts of myself and my life that are really important to me. And I think probably comes back to a little bit about what I was saying about self-employment and how we can actually end up working more rather than working better. And I'd say very honestly, probably the last year to 2 years, I've become much more, it's a work in progress, but much, much more intentional to focus on, yes, being the best possible version of my work self that I can be, but also being the best possible friend I can be, being the best possible partner I can be, son, brother, whatever else can go on that list, kind of just living a more rounded life, living a more whole, full experience of life. Because I think especially being in a space where I'm supporting other people and being of service in a way, I feel like there's no ceiling to that. Like I could realistically just be like, I want to help all of the people all of the time. And that's just going to, A, eventually kill me, but B, it's not sustainable. And so to be the best version of that part of me, I also have to be fulfilling those other parts. And so that's one side to it. A slightly more less deep answer. I mentioned actually the studio where I first experienced breathwork, and I'm still in touch with those guys. And we recently opened a new studio where we've got a movement space and a gym upstairs, and then an immersion studio downstairs, which is sauna, ice baths, and breathwork, which is amazing. And I'm there pretty much every day. So that's over in Fulham, called the Move Method. So that's one part of what I do. And then I think, it's shadow again showing up. I'm a musician. I love music.
No way. Oh,
I love
cool.
music. I think when you say I'm a musician, people are like, wow, he must be good. I'm like, I'm a very amateur musician. I play guitar, I sing, I write songs. And that is probably my one love that I refuse to ever try and make a go of, because I don't want to lose my love for it. So yeah, that's probably one part of it. Sport and exercise has always been a huge part of my life as well, and something that I'm trying to reconnect back to at the moment. So yeah, I guess that's maybe a slightly fuller picture of me as a person.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think I loved how you answered that, because it also reminds me again of this automatic cultural narrative that we're a part of. And so often we introduce ourselves and what do you do for work? And that's how you define your existence. And we forget that there's so much more to life than just what you do for work. And it can be tough to do that when you are working 1 million hours a day, and that is what you focus your time and energy on. So I think that was a helpful reminder, even for me, to be like, actually, no, I'm a multifaceted person with loads of different interests and lots of different things going on. And sometimes it feels like you have to apologize for those things. But we're all kind of wonderful, multi-hyphenate, complex human beings. And so why not?
Exactly. I think it's really important. It's something that through experiences of being on podcasts and hosting podcasts, have realized, it's a nice thing to be able to talk about, as actually like, who are you? Like, because I don't want to, even us sat here, like, we actually probably only really know each other as what we do for a living. Right. And so I think it's really nice when you can actually go a little bit beyond that. And I started getting really frustrated, truth be told, that I became like, I was Jamie the Breathwork guy. And to a lot of people I still am. And that's fine, because I love what I do and I'm always happy to have a conversation about it. But it meant that I was starting to pigeonhole myself. I was going, I'm Jamie the Breathwork guy, and I have to show up in that way everywhere I go. And I can't have dark humor because I'm supposed to be holistic and spiritual and all of these things, and able to hold a really safe space for people. It's like, no, I can have those two can coexist. I don't let the dark humor necessarily come into my work. I'm starting to, though. So it's like, if we have these different identities, it's very easy and very quick to reject certain parts of yourself that don't fit into your main identity at that point in time. And I think that's sad. And I think that's where we lose ourselves, because you can just get so wrapped up in one part of your identity. And I think that, again, becomes restrictive. If the world as we live in, which it is very, very heavy on, what do you do? What are you adding? How are you being productive? Then you can push down the bits of the creative parts, the hobbies, the play, the joy, all of the stuff we've talked about, that I think I'm certainly noticing and have noticed in the last couple of years. I'm lacking. I want more of that time in my life. Like, I like what I do, but I also love the balance, and I appreciate the balance, and I appreciate the lightness in amongst what can be very heavy work at times as well.
Definitely. And it's all the stuff that then you store back away, and you have to go to a breathwork session in order for it to come back out again.
Exactly. It's something, again, in these deeper breathwork experiences that is really impactful, but sort of healing more broadly, which is, I think, this self-development culture has been a very good thing and a very bad thing. I think it's done us a lot of good, because it's great to be more self-aware than not. But I think in doing so, and I speak mainly to my own experience, but a lot of people that I've worked with as well, as we go on this journey of self-development, and in doing so, we think we have to reject and get rid of the parts of ourselves that lived before that. because we were suffering in some way, which led us to going on that journey. And so you kind of get to a point in that journey where you're like, yeah, that doesn't resonate with me. That version of myself wasn't great. I didn't like that about myself. And we wonder why we're still not feeling good about ourselves. And it's because all of those parts of you still live within you. They are still parts of you. And the harder you push them away, the harder they bite back. And so if you really want to feel like you're moving towards wholeness, and interestingly, one of the original schools of breathwork is holotropic breathwork, which from the Greek means moving towards wholeness, which I really like. But if you do want to move towards wholeness, all of the modalities that are gaining popularity at the moment in a healing form are, can you integrate the parts of yourself that you've forgotten, pushed away, rejected, or resent? That could be breathwork, that could be internal family systems, that could be a whole manner of things, shadow work. That's essentially it, right? We're looking at, where am I denying myself from my truth, and how can I bring that stuff back in?
Yeah, bring every version of yourself along.
Yeah, even the crap. There's plenty of it.
Plenty of it. What else should I ask you? Any final thoughts that you want to make sure people know, have thought of? Any invitations for people as it relates to wellness, breathwork, showing up as their full whole selves?
I think it'll be a little bit of a repetition, but it's more a note to self is stop taking yourself so seriously, please, because it allows everyone else to stop taking themselves so seriously. It's happened, and this is, we'll call it a slight overshare, but I'm in that kind of mood. An ex-partner of mine, I always remember saying, she said to me, it's a shame you don't let everyone else see this side of you. And she was referring to me being a bit silly and a bit funny and whatever. And that actually hit me really hard, because I was like, yeah, why don't I let that happen? And I still don't really, to the fullest extent, let many people see that. And obviously you want to feel safe, and you want to feel like you trust people not to judge you, and like you're not going to be rejected. But it again comes back to this sort of contagious nature of openness and vulnerability and authenticity, because it just gives other people permission to do the same. And if we're all waiting for permission, then nothing's happening. So if we're all waiting for someone else to move first, then that's tough, and that's going to be rough. So yeah, I think that would be one thing. And then I think on a more professional breathwork note, I did a little self-experiment with my Whoop band a few weeks ago, where I came back from a presentation that I was giving, and I felt pretty wired, a bit jacked up. I was like, let me just check what my heart rate is. And it was sitting at about 100 beats per minute. And I thought, okay, I'm going to use the live heart rate feature, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do 1 minute of slow extended exhale breathing and just see what happens to my heart rate. I'm either going to feel good about it, or my life's work is going to be down the toilet. And I dropped my heart rate from 100 to 57 in 60 seconds.
Wow.
And that was probably 5 rounds of an extended exhale breath max. And it was such a important and necessary reminder to me of the simplicity and the impact of the simplicity. So if you feel, as is often the case, that you don't have the time to integrate a new habit or practice, or you're not sure that this stuff really works, I would encourage you and urge you to find, most of my clients, I get them to work with breathing breaks, which is at the end of your podcast, at the end of your Zoom call, at the end of your client call, whatever it might be, sit still for a minute, breathe slowly, and then go on to the next thing. It just invites in some regulation. It invites in coming off of autopilot. It invites in some intentionality to your day, and it just creates space. And there's this weird dichotomy of life, or contradiction of life, which is the more you can slow down, the more time it feels like you have. Your days are longer when you are slowing down. If you move at 1,000,000 miles an hour, the day flies by. And so breath is a great place to start inviting in some slowness, and inviting in that spaciousness into your day, which we all need a little bit more of.
Definitely. And I think just to that last point, often we feel like we don't have time and rushing to the next thing, and I don't have a minute, but how much more productive and efficient and clear-sighted you'll be if you do just take that minute to breathe and slow down. I think it's really can be very simple, but very powerful stuff. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here and chatting with me today. If people want to find you and follow along with what you're up to, where should we send them?
Yeah, everything that I do is under the Breath Space, so thebreathspace.co.uk, and on Instagram and socials, _breath_space. And I also have a new podcast coming out in the new year called The Boys' Toilets. So watch this space.
Okay, can't wait to listen in. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks for listening to the Restorative Force podcast. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review and share it with a friend. You can follow us at Rain Wellbeing on Instagram and at TikTok. Thanks so much and see you next time.